For the upcoming release of Avengers Infinity War, I decided myself that I wanted to review all the MCU movies before the release date of Infinity War, which is April 27th of this year. So now we're on to Phase 2 of the MCU. Now Phase 2 is where the Marvel Cinematic Universe took a different turn. I feel like it did very weak at first. It's almost as if the Avengers was so hard to compete with that they didn't know how to start off Phase 2. Well, with that being said, let's go on to the first movie of Phase 2, Iron Man 3. Suffering from PTSD since saving New York, Tony Stark is now more dependent on the suits, so much that every aspect of his life is affected, including his relationship with Pepper. After a terrorist enemy known as the Mandarin strikes terror, Tony must take action to avenge his losses and protect the people he loves. So, yeah. This is honestly my least favorite MCU movie. I was disappointed with a lot of things in this, but let me try to see the good out of it first. Robert Downey Jr. does a great job as Tony Stark and Iron Man, as always. There's a lot of humor in this movie. The actors look like they're having a good time, and it does look entertaining for some of the scenes. My favorite scene in the movie would have to be the ending when all the Iron Man suits show up. Now, let's discuss what I hated. Number 1, the plot. I didn't really care for the plot. Tony all of a sudden has anxiety because of the attack on New York in the first Avengers. At first, I didn't understand what was going on because I didn't know too much about anxiety at the time. But after growing up, I realized I can relate to this movie a little bit more since Tony does go through anxiety. I realize now that he suffers from post-traumatic stress, which is basically when a person observes something traumatizing from their past and it haunts them to this day just thinking about it. Tony's basically traumatized from seeing the aliens as he went through the wormhole. I can understand something like that causing someone to freak out, but this movie does it well at first, and then all of a sudden towards the end of the movie, Tony gets over his anxiety, just like that. Like, what just happened? That doesn't make any sense at all. Number 2, Christmas. Why does this movie have to take place during Christmas? I don't understand that at all. This movie came out like in April or May in 2013. This movie could just work fine without it being Christmas themed, so there's no point to add it whatsoever. Number 3, the kid. This kid's annoying. I don't like the kid sidekicks at all. I gotta admit, it is funny only because Tony insults him most of the time anyways. Other than that, I don't really care for him. Number 4, the villain. Before I start talking about this, I just want to warn you guys that there will be spoilers, so if you haven't watched the movie and don't want anything ruined, then I suggest you fast forward or yeah. So the main villain is the Mandarin. The Mandarin is a terrorist villain that is threatening the US by hacking live television. He's giving threats, murdering people on screen, and more. He seems like a threatening villain. We've been waiting for this moment since Tony Stark got kidnapped by the 10 Rings in the first Iron Man movie. But then all of it goes downhill when we find out that Ben Kingsley isn't actually the Mandarin. He's just an actor that pretended to be a terrorist this whole entire time. This seriously pissed off a lot of people, and it confused the hell out of me. I thought there were going to be another Mandarin or something in the movie, but it turns out that the Mandarin in the movie was Aldrich Killian the whole entire time. Some people find this plot clever, and some people hated it. I happen to be the ones that hated it because I actually wanted to see the Mandarin on screen, not Aldrich Killian. The studio, including Shane Black, decided to do this because they didn't believe that the Mandarin would be an important villain, or at least not as popular as they thought it would be. But nope. Turns out that the Mandarin's more popular than you think. Well, of course he is. I mean, he's Iron Man's main villain. Number 5, Aldrich Killian. Aldrich Killian sucks. His motivation is that he wants revenge on Tony because he got rejected by him on New Year's Eve. Does that sound familiar? He goes from this nerdy, obsessive fan to a pretty boy, cocky, super egomaniac. I feel like the actor that plays Aldrich Killian does the same role in every movie. I just saw Bedtime Stories a while ago, and it's pretty much the same person. Guy Pearce. I think I prefer his character in that movie than in this one. And those fire powers, holy shit, they're terrible. I think I would have preferred Killian's powers, including the ones from his minions, if it had something to do with the alien technology that belonged to the Chitauri and the Avengers. Maybe that technology could have been used by the Mandarin to create humans that could turn themselves into lava, but no, it's just a science experiment that was done by Killian, so anybody can basically do this.
Number
Number five.
6, Iron Man Mark 42.
So I guess Mark 42 is supposed to be this awesome new suit that Tony introduces to us, but no, it's just a prototype suit that can't fly, doesn't have any missiles, and that falls apart very easily. Why does Tony Stark use it then? But wait, why can't he just use his other suits? I'm not going into that because I know there's a lot of plot holes in this movie, and I know every movie has its own plot holes, but this one, I just want to stay out of it. Anyways, remember how I said that there's a lot of good humor in this movie? Well, there's also a lot of bad humor. The bad humor is when Tony's about ready to fight, he's ready to kick ass, but his Iron Man suit keeps breaking. It's like every badass scene that's ready to start, something has to happen to ruin it. During the ending, when all the suits come out, Rhodes is like, hey, how about you give me a suit? And Tony's all like, oh no, they're just programmed to me. And then his suit picks up Rhodey and he's like, you gotta be kidding me. That's when the humor is unnecessary. They do the exact same thing in the final fight between Tony and Aldrich Killian. Right when Killian is about to murder Stark, he calls up his Mark 42 suit, and then it just crashes everywhere. Seriously? Just get rid of the suit. It's annoying, just like the scenes with Rhodes. I don't even think we get to see Rhodey fight this so much in this movie. At least not in his Iron Patriot suit. Everything in this movie is just done by man. Actually, I just thought of something better. I just thought of a better plot. Instead of putting Tony's anxiety as the main focus, the movie should have just focused more on doing things yourself rather than being dependent on the suits. You don't need the suits in order to protect yourself. You don't need a suit to try to stop you from worrying or fight evil. You just need to be you and fight crime as a human being. Honestly, that's not a bad plot. Just thinking about it right now. Because for a majority of this movie, Tony and Rhodes fight outside of their suits anyways. This movie should have just been called Man 3. In the end, I just want to say that Iron Man 3 is not the worst movie out there, but I do have to admit that it is disappointing. Alright, so let's move on to Thor the Dark World. In ancient times, the gods of Asgard fought and won a war against the evil race known as the Dark Elves. The survivors buried the ether in a secret location. Hundreds of years later, Jane Foster finds the ether and becomes his host, forcing Thor to bring to her Asgard before the Dark Elf Malekith captures her and uses the weapon to destroy the 9 realms, including Earth. To be honest, I don't think this movie is all that bad, at least compared to Iron Man 3, but compared to the other MCU movies, this one has to definitely be one of the worst. I have to admit that I thought this movie was pretty entertaining when I first watched it. I didn't see it in theaters, and this is the only MCU movie that I didn't get to watch at the movies. But I did rent it on Blu-ray, and what I liked about it is I was entertained by the action sequences. Chris Hemsworth does a well job as Thor, like always, and Tom Hiddleston does an amazing job as Loki. I also like how the movie has more input on Thor's mother. She's one of the characters that I did like the most, and I was glad to see more of Asgard in this film. Now, the problem with this movie is that it has a lot of characters that are poorly written. Let's start with Jane's team. That was the number one complaint in the first Thor movie because Jane's team made this movie really silly, especially in this one. The romance between Jane and Thor is a bit awkward. I don't know. I just think that they're both very different. It's like when Thor's talking, Jane is just like she has no idea what he's talking about, and she's just basically in love with him because he's good looking. And sometimes Thor even acts like an idiot around her because of the things that she says or does, and like I said, it gets really awkward. But I don't mind Natalie Portman at all. She's a really talented actress, but I feel like I said before, that the characters are just poorly written. I don't mind Darcy. She's not as bad as people say, which I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for. But I do have to admit, she does act like a child at times during the movie, which frustrates audiences. Dr. Eric Selvig is crazy for no reason. I mean, Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, was controlled by Loki's staff, and he didn't go psychotic like Dr. Selvig did. While I do admire Chris Hemsworth's portrayal as Thor, his character seems silly and idiotic at times. And when I say idiotic, I mean when he's with James' team. The only one that seems to do well in his character during this movie would have to be Loki. It's almost as he knows he's in a bad movie, and he just kind of makes fun of everything that goes on, which is pretty funny, I gotta admit. Also, everything that goes on in this movie, such as the realms opening portals and combining, is pretty huge, and no one else is involved in the situation. Not Iron Man, not S.H.I.E.L.D., or anyone else that's involved in this catastrophic event going on. But that's just a plot hole. There are many plot holes in other movies, so I'm not going to complain too much about that. The only important thing that comes from this movie is the ether, and the ether is not going to be introduced again until Infinity War. Now, my biggest complaint in this movie would have to be the villain. Christopher Eccleston, I love you. You did a really great job as the Ninth Doctor, but his role as Malekith was very, very bland. I can't remember a single dialogue from him in this movie. He speaks in a foreign language most of the time anyways, so we really don't get to understand his backstory, his motivation for what he's trying to achieve besides power. If only his character show a bit more enthusiasm, then I guess his character would have been a little better. But it's hard to try to figure out how to improve on this guy because his character is just so serious and bland. It's awful. In all, Thor the Dark World does entertain but lacks on its writing, which makes it not bad, but not good either. Alrighty, so now we're on to our third movie in Phase 2, Captain America the Winter Soldier. After the events in New York with his fellow Avengers, Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, lives in the nation's capital as he tries to adjust to modern times. An attack of S.H.I.E.L.D. throws Rogers into a situation that places the whole world at risk. Joining forces with Black Widow and a new ally, the Falcon, Rogers struggles to find information about Hydra, but he and his team soon come against an unexpected enemy. Thank God for this movie. This is the type of movie that we needed after the first two MCU movies of Phase 2. It is such an improvement, and it is a great movie overall. Chris Evans' portrayal of Captain America is amazing in this movie. Just in the beginning of it, on the boat scene, we definitely get to see him fight more using his fists and his shield. I love seeing him use the shield against the bad guys. He is literally and brutally murdering these men in the beginning. It's so awesome. It's awesome to see him fight these guys in the beginning and throughout the whole movie. Other characters definitely caught my interest. Black Widow does a great portrayal as a female companion in this movie. I gotta admit, I like the duo between her and Steve Rogers. It wasn't romantic, but they have a good chemistry. It's just two badass superheroes teaming up to solve what's been going on with S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra. I like seeing these two on screen together. I also love seeing the Falcon. He's definitely one of my most favorite characters in this movie, and he does really well as a sidekick of Steve Rogers. The plot is pretty damn good as well. I mean, who would have known that S.H.I.E.L.D. was taken over by Hydra all along? It's a crazy plot twist, and the head of Hydra does have an evil and well plan going on. Winter Soldier is probably one of my most favorite villains of the MCU. He's menacing, strong, and furious. I love seeing the action sequences between Winter Soldier and Cap. Seeing those two fighting together looks awesome. I also love the action sequences overall in this movie. It's such a huge improvement over the last one. Remember how I said the first Avenger used a lot of CGI? Well, this movie uses more practical effects, so everything looks realistic, and that's what makes it great. I was pretty entertained watching this in the first time I saw it, and now I was even more impressed watching it the second time. Giving a lot of credit to the directors of this movie, the Russo brothers have done a great job so far with the Captain America movies, and I can't wait to see what they'll do with Infinity War. So overall, Captain America: The Winter Soldier is one of the best movies that I've seen by far.